New York. I'm joining you. It's still sunny, although it's supposed to be rainy later today. But it's a wonderful morning here in New York. And it's so great to see on the chat that so many of you are joining from around the world. I saw we have Italy, Portugal, Guatemala, Nigeria, Venezuela, Pakistan, Thailand, Vietnam, USA, UK, Hong Kong, and a number of other countries. And I think just that in itself, to me, is a really important signal and message that an active global citizenship framework and the work that we all do together is important all around the world. And I thank you very much for joining and for being part of this. My name is Daniel Obst. I'm the president and CEO of AFS Intercultural Programs. And I'm really excited to be here with you today to introduce our new educational framework for active global citizenship. And before we get started, I just really want to briefly introduce AFS for those of you who don't know it. And partly because also AFS has a really unique history, and that history relates to why we're doing this today. AFS was started originally during the First World War as a voluntary humanitarian ambulance service. And later, after the Second World War, it evolved into a youth exchange program. So really different types of organizations, if you think about it, from a humanitarian effort in the wars to an exchange program, essentially. But it relates, and I will share with you in just a moment why. Today, our mission, of course, is to give people intercultural learning opportunities so that they have the knowledge, skills, and values to create a more just and peaceful world. So at the core, all of AFS's efforts today are really about nurturing the values and capacities of intercultural dialogue and active global citizenship. We've been providing exchange programs, intercultural training programs for over 75 years. As you can see here, we are a network organization with 56 national AFS organizations, which means we're very locally rooted and locally led and governed, which I think is really important. We operate in over 100 countries. We have 12,000 exchanges every year, 500,000 alumni, and we're still a volunteer organization with 30,000 volunteers around the world. But if you look back at our origins, active global citizenship was always part of our history. And AFS always tried to respond to really critical issues of our time with a call to action and engagement. And it all started with these volunteer ambulance drivers during the First World War. Their motto then was Acta Manent, which essentially translates into deeds matter or actions remain. And I think this is why this, to me, is so interesting, that this notion of active global citizens, which we're just introducing now, is something that was incredibly relevant more than 100 years ago. And you see even the posters behind me are some of these first recruitment posters about, recruiting volunteers who would serve in this humanitarian effort. And why is this important now, right? And in so many ways, not much has changed in our world. There are still wars, there's still tremendous need for intercultural dialogue. But today, of course, things are much more volatile, uncertain, they're complex, and things are ambiguous. And we have a huge set of global challenges as represented through the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. So really for us, the question is, how do we help people develop the capacities that are required now for a world that is not only more peaceful, or more just, but also more equitable and sustainable. So I think this is really the backdrop for why we're introducing this educational framework on active global citizenship. And it's very clear that the world needs more active global citizens, and our goal at AFS is to help develop them. So this was just to introduce you to why we're doing this and what AFS is all about. I'd now like to turn over to our wonderful panelists, starting with Eloise Dolan, who is a member of our board of trustees and also the current chair of the education committee, to share a little bit more about kind of the backdrop of this framework and how it serves as a basis for what we do at AFS today. So over to you, Eloise, in Singapore.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, and a warm welcome and hello Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Just very quickly, I'm from Australia and usually based there, and I just wanted to acknowledge, as is customary with in Australia, that many of us are dialing in from lands that have traditional owners and custodians, and I'd like to pay my respects to any First Nations people joining this call today, but also welcome all of you for coming together, and thank you for coming together in this shared digital space to grow and learn. So I have the privilege of just providing a few kind of key background comments in my role as the chair of the Education Committee, but also as a long-time AFSer, and it's so wonderful to see so many names that I know from across the world, so welcome and hi. So why a new educational framework? I think as Daniel acknowledged, the world has changed. Our AFS operating environment has changed, and we, with this framework, are responding to that change, but continuing to ensure that the work we do is relevant. We're also strengthening our commitment to creating a more just, peaceful, and equitable world, because it is time, but also why not? And creating a shared language in order to achieve all of this, that really also a language that remains central to that identity that Daniel just spoke about. So as he mentioned, we were already in the business of creating global citizens. And for a very long and more recent time, it has been a wonderful kind of product of the work that we do, but perhaps not always deliberately front and center, or maybe always as explicit. So yes, it was talked about, but maybe we didn't spell it out so much. Firstly, what we mean by an active global citizen, and secondly, how to become one. So as I said, we're creating this shared language and creating a kind of even playing field to go forward and respond to the world that we're in. So right now, and with this launch, we're creating a moment and a supporting framework to show the world that AFS has got the expertise to create community and create peace through our education excellence. We have a strong reputation already with research-backed expertise in global and non-formal education. So I also want to be clear, this new framework is a refinement, it's a recentering of what we do. We have the expertise in intercultural learning, but intercultural learning for what purpose, really? So this new framework is an avenue or a compass, which we'll hear about soon, to direct the work that we do. It's a strengthening of the past, taking stock of what we have and how we lend that to the future. So anyway, very, very briefly, I'll just move on to the next slide on who actually developed the framework. And I'd just really like to take a moment to acknowledge that this framework has been thoroughly considered and contributed by a vast array of players that make up our global community in AFS, so from all corners of the globe. On the slide, you will see too many names for me to shout out, but I think one thing to really note is it's a multi-sector approach: academia, public, private, youth. It's a multi-experience and a multi-age approach as well, which I think is really, really important in the work that we do. There are also some new committee members who work with me this year who are not listed, but they're also working to take this work sort of forward and out into the world, which is really exciting. And I hope that past and present committee members can kind of reveal themselves in the chat as well. So speaking of this global community, who are our active global citizens? And I'll just get Carol to move on to the next slide. So who is our community? I think what excites me about this framework is it also makes it clear that anyone can join us at sort of any stage of their life and any kind of moment of intrigue or excitement. So historically, of course, we have put students and young people as sort of the basis of our traditional programs, but I think this framework formally recognises the weight of our other key players that make up our AFS ecosystem. So that's families, schools, educators, volunteers, and our staff, in addition to the students and participants. So those groups have always been important, but I think this launch is really also a moment to open up to the possibility and sort of accessibility for new players to come in, because it's so accessible, and you'll hear about that in Veronica's moment in a moment. So I'll move on to the next slide in terms of, what is the work that we do and our delivery methods. So looking very briefly at this infographic, you will see 4 pillars. from our new global strategy that was recently launched, and I'm sure we'll share a link or something in the chat to that soon. But these on the bottom, these are areas of action. So we are creating active global citizens through these pillars of, yes, our programs, of course, so traditional, digital, over 18, our youth assembly, we have so many these days, but also our education outputs, our volunteerism, and our advocacy. So if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to also touch briefly on the AFS theory of change that's coming through. So within those areas that I just sort of pointed out as well, those areas of action, the AFS theory of change is happening. So this concept has been with us and researched back for a long time, and it remains a key component of this new framework too. So whether that is in volunteerism, through our programs, through our advocacy work, we are creating impact by allowing our key players that we mentioned before to experience, learn, and then practice through this framework to become global citizens and have impact in the world. So really, this framework supports and unifies our work, giving it an impactful purpose. So that was a very brief kind of introduction into the thought process behind why it is that we're launching this today, and it's a really exciting time. But I think it's probably about time that you were actually introduced to our framework for active global citizenship. And with that, I'm so pleased to invite Veronica to the floor. So over to you, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Eloise and Daniel. It is such an incredible pleasure for me to be here with you, taking a moment with everybody from our busy lives, especially for all of you taking time from your busy lives and from your families in order to think about the kind of people, the kind of young people we might want to nurture for the world that Daniel so eloquently described. Today, I'm very honored to be introducing this active global citizenship framework, both a central piece and AFS new organizational strategy, as well as a contribution to our contemporary deliberations about the purpose of education in the 21st century. So I'm really very excited about this opportunity to be here with Carol, with Daniel, with Eloise, with so many of our committee members, and with the fabulous co-panelists. Grateful for the opportunity of learning with you. So let us begin to think about what active global citizenship might be by looking at a story. And this is the story of Shomi. Shomi is a really amazing young woman from Bangladesh, whose journey as a change maker began as through a life-changing experience that she had spending some time in Michigan in the United States in 2011. And she says, when I was with my host family, this is her voice, when I was with my host family in the US, I saw that volunteering was taken quite seriously. I began to do more of these community service activities, and I really found the joy in it. It's such a cool feeling. That is the joy. I loved it so much. She had that whenever I got a chance, I would volunteer. So Shomi volunteers an extraordinary number of hours during her year as an exchange student, which gained her public recognition and even a presidential award. Community volunteering, she says, was a way to thank our host community for hosting us. And then she says, when I got back to my country, I asked myself, what about our own community, our own country, the people back home, so to speak? In 2014, Shomi lost her mom suddenly to a preventable disease back home, cholera, diarrhea. She came to see her mom's passing as connected to millions of affected people in Bangladesh, especially vulnerable and marginalized people and communities who don't have access to clean water or good sanitation practices. Turning sort of her pain into a focus and turning her frustration into action, she chose to dedicate the remaining years, that followed to water sanitation activism. So when you hear her talk, her voice sort of fills with passion when she explains the power of stories to make change happen. She says, the story of one person without access to proper sanitation times 4.5 billion people in the world experiencing similar conditions immediately gives you a sense of the magnitude and urgency of the issue. So today, Shami leads an NGO that she created called Awareness 360. She works with youth change makers, doing campaigns on social issues, social awareness, and contributing to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And what's interesting about Shami is that she's not alone. The whole generation of young people, a growing movement of people who are finding a way to care for the planet, and to care for our fellow human beings. A movement that we might call of active global citizens. You see them arriving in universities and high schools, and it's wonderful to have an opportunity to support them. What I love about Shomi's story is that she helps us see, she helps us recognize what young people are capable of. Certainly not every young person in the world, not every young person around us will follow exactly Shomi's path. But what we cannot do, each person will probably find their own sort of spheres of influence and possibilities for action. But what a 21st century education cannot miss, in my view, is the opportunity to spark young people's capacious and hopeful and compassionate imagination, to expand what they think they're capable of. But even more, such form of education stands to serve not only our young people, but as Eloise said, it stands to serve the adults in our lives, teachers, families, leaders, community volunteers. In some, it stands to help all of us. So I see the new framework for active global citizenship as an invitation to all of us to expand our imagination of what we're capable of, and try out new ways of being, new ways of standing in the world. But you probably would want to know exactly what this framework is all about. So let me introduce it to you. We say that the kinds of person we want to develop through the programs at AFS and through global education more broadly are people whose informed and compassionate and ethical compass drives them to lead lives and make decisions that contribute to a more just, equitable, peaceful, and sustainable world. A few things that you'll probably notice in this definition, in this view. Notice the emphasis on kind of person. This is an education that is about formation rather than accumulation of information in our minds. Notice the qualities of informed, compassionate, ethical, spanning human capacities in the cognitive, the social, emotional, and the values, the ethical realm. It's about the whole person. Notice a metaphor of the compass, something that becomes part of us, a tool that shapes our everyday life decisions. There are a few qualities that we highlight when we think about active global citizenship, and the principles that drive this definition, if you wish, with this view. One is a whole person approach, cognitive, social, emotional, ethical, physical health. It's applicable across all ages, not only for a young, but also for volunteers, families, teachers. It is this compass for individual and collective decision making. Brújula in Spanish. It's an emphasis on becoming. It's not that we acquire information, it's we become a certain kind of person. It's a lifelong pursuit that we can start tomorrow, we can start today. It's rooted in experiential learning, very central to the AFS experience, and leaving on one's sort of regular comfort zone. And it's aimed at action, at transforming the world around us with a vision of what this world might be, a peaceful, a sustainable, etc. The four core dimensions of this framework. One is valuing and belonging to a common, shared, and diverse world. Second, inquiring critically about the world in which we live and beyond our immediate environment. Third, understand and relate to others across difference. And fourth, of course, taking action to collective well-being. And these dimensions work together sort of organically and dynamically in shaping who we become. Let me unpack them one by one. Value and belong to a common and diverse world. This dimension is very much about developing a fundamental disposition to valuing and appreciating our common humanity and our shared planet. It is about feeling that we belong to something larger than ourselves, worth caring about. It's about understanding ourselves in the context that shape us and recognizing at once the commonalities and the differences with which we live, appreciating both. It's about becoming able to embody a deep appreciation for this diversity and unwavering respect for human dignity under all conditions. This dimension of active global citizenship is really at the heart of understanding who we are as protagonists in the construction of the story of humans, the story of our planet. We see it in Shomi when she seamlessly connects her personal loss with the loss of us, a capacious loss that embraces, a capacious us, that embraces all humanity. We observe her capacity to situate her story in a global context of humans and planet, clearly greater than herself, than her individual. This is a humanity to which she belongs, for which she cares, and that she chooses to protect. Another dimension, inquiring critically about the world beyond our immediate environment. Clearly, we can do little without understanding the problems that we're trying to address. So this dimension is fundamentally about our understanding of the world, its cultures, the issues that shape our lives and our times. It is not about accumulating fixed knowledge or skills, but it's about becoming increasingly able to inquire curiously, deeply about our complex local and global issues. So while learning to inquire may seem like a perennial goal in education, in a world of hyper-information and virtual realities and fake news, it becomes especially important that active global citizens become able to navigate the world with a healthy dose of skepticism and a critical stance. So an active global citizen is a person who can inquire critically, embodying epistemic values such as a commitment to always seeking the truth. Very important in our times. So we can imagine Somi, right, seeking to understand the roots of the problem of unequal access to sanitation and clean water and the devastating consequences of this for the population. We can imagine her inquiring, studying, looking for sources, weighing sources, coming to conclusions with others, inquiring critically about the world. Let's move to the third dimension. And they don't come in a particular order. We can enter the space through multiple dimensions, through any sort of entry point that works given our context or what interests us. This dimension is about understanding and relating to others across difference. And it's quite fundamental to the capacity to living together. It involves developing a capacity to seek to understand other people's experiences, influence, values, points of view, the conditions of power and inequality in which people's lives unfold. It's very important in this dimension to engage and sustain in civil dialogue across differences. This is again another extremely important capacity for our times. That we become aware of the many languages with which we communicate, verbal and non-verbal, and we become committed to sustaining dialogue, not cancelling others, not interrupting, but really to sustaining the possibility of transforming ourselves and transforming others through civil dialogue. And we see Shomi as he tries to convey the importance of the problem that she's addressing by looking at the power of stories in conveying the magnitude of the problem and humanizing a problem that is typically described in terms of numbers. It's about relationships and dialogue. Final dimension, of course, we could not have an active global citizenship framework without close attention to action. And this is an exciting capacity for young people. They get engaged, they're really excited about the possibility of, in a world that is so complex and sometimes can be so overwhelming, the idea that each one of us has a sphere of influence, that we can make a change. And that brings hope to the enterprise of participating in our world. Joy as our main character here would tell us. So here we see our youth and ourselves in a way reimagined, trusting this capacity that we have of making a difference for others and for our planet, with all of our spheres of influence, a conversation with a friend that might influence our minds, participation in a community project, so participation of faraway endeavor. So it's about how to recognize, to be alert, to be attentive to opportunities for influence. In a way, it's a way of standing in a world in such a way that the issues don't just pass us by, but issues like issues of contamination, issues of exclusion become invitations for us to act. The energizing force of taking action is not an individual one. Rather, it entails a capacity to collaborate with others, to overcome obstacles, to sustain a commitment to this larger vision of the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, we have sort of the active global citizens as valuing and belonging to a common and diverse world, able to inquire critically about the world beyond our immediate environment, to understand and relate to others across differences, to take action, and all of these capacities work together. Now, none of these would work if they did not ground, if they were not grounded, if you wish, at three levels: a very personal level, a local community level, and the world. So with that, I would like to close by inviting us to think about what we call the 3 whys at Project Zero. Why might developing active global citizenship matter to me, to each one of us, in addition to our children? Why might it matter to the people around me, families, friends, city, nation? And why might it matter to the world? So with that, I'm so excited about the possibility of continuing this conversation. I will close and pass it on back to you, and thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Eloise and Veronica, for introducing this framework. I think it's really quite powerful to see when you see it all pulled together in terms of these 4 dimensions and the really important capacities that are required essentially from all of us if we want to develop this kind of compass to lead these lives as active global citizens. And a number of comments in the chat refer to age, right? Like, what's the right age to be an active global citizen? I think it's really important here to reinforce again that this is not about age. Anybody can be, anybody should be an active global citizen, and that it is, as in the definition described, it's a compass. So in a way, it is a lifelong learning process. So it's never too late to start thinking about these issues, to participate in programs, whether they're AFS or other programs that help you develop these capacities and tools to lead lives as active global citizens. So I encourage everybody to think about that. And I think it's also really important, even though, of course, AFS developed this in the context of our own programs, this is not an exclusive framework for AFS initiatives. It really is intended as a framework that also other organizations can use and adapt into their own context and their own organizational or personal needs. And so I'd love to invite our respondents or expert panelists to reflect a little bit, because they come from different backgrounds, from different organizations, and kind of why, from their perspective, does active global citizenship matter? How does this framework resonate with them and their organizations? And I think this will kind of kickstart the conversation. And then, of course, we invite comments or questions from you. You can already put them in the Q&A feature so that we can already start looking at some of the questions or comments you might have. But I'd like to very much welcome our three expert panelists, Carla, Priya, and Sarah. And I'd like to invite Carla to start. Carla, briefly introduce yourself, what you do, but it's also really wonderful to welcome you back as a colleague who used to work at AFS. So welcome, Carla.
Kia ora, Daniel. Kia ora ana, talofalawa, maloelele, palokalofalahi, bulavinaka, and warm Pacific greetings for you from the Pacific, where I am based. I called Aotearoa New Zealand home, and I am the Director of Scholarships for Education New Zealand Manapokite Ao. It's a pleasure to be here today. Similar to Eloise, long-time AFSer, first-time expert, I guess. So lovely to be sharing with you. Look, I wanted to start my reply, my right of reply, as we call it in Māori settings, through our taupara, which is what you normally use to start a welcoming. And this taupara says, ka tangata titi, ka tangata kaka, ka tangi ko hoki aho, tihei Māori ora, which literally translates to the mockingbird cries, the parrot cries, therefore I cry, behold, there is life. And while that's the literal translation, the way that I understand this taupara is talking about how the titi, the mockingbird, goes out to the ocean and seeks the voices of far away, of other lands. So it says, I have listened to the voices far. And then ka tangata kaka, I have also listened to the chatterbird and the forest. I have listened to my people. I have listened to the people that are close to me. And that's what gives me a right to speak today. And I think that taupara just so beautifully encompasses the idea of global citizenship, right? And many of you talked about this morning, of how it's about that connection, that understanding of where you stand in the world before you speak. Many Māori taupara actually talk about the forest, and different birds represent different things. So for example, in this one, we have the titi, because it has a very clear voice. And we also have the kaka, which is chatter, 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 and talks about our collective wealth and being recognized and celebrating the distinctiveness that we each bring. I am not Māori. I'm in fact from the other side of the Pacific, from Colombia originally. I am a manuhiri, which also translates as bird from afar, but have, as I mentioned, chosen to live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But I just wanted to acknowledge that the presence of Māori as first people in this land in our collective colonial history is what frames my understanding of global citizenship. And so the lens that I bring to it. So now to get to the framework. When I was asked to be part of the panel, I thought when you look at a framework, you need to think about what does the framework help you see, right? What does it make evident that is hard to conceptualize? And then what does, by the very nature of being a framework, what does it obscure or, doesn't give us much light to? So for me, there was so much I loved today about your framework. And I love this idea of the metaphor of the moral compass. And I really think that, Veronica, there's such a, we have argued for so long about what this global citizenship is, right? Is it a way of being? Is it a competence? Is it a, you know, and I think that just so beautifully gives it grounding in the real world. And I can think about this idea that leadership is moments, so that you're in your moment, you have your compass, and you decide what to do. I totally support what Eloise said about taking this shared vocabulary that we now have to really give the blueprint to how we interact with each other. And absolutely to your point, Daniel, as the beautiful legacy, the beautiful history that AFS brings to this space, in terms of acknowledging the pioneer voice of AFS, but it feels like AFS has grown up. And Eloise, you talked about going from just potentially peace and understanding to sustainability and, you know, really working for justice and taking action in that framework. So I really love that. Many parallels that I'm sure other people are drawing between the OECD PISA framework, the UNESCO hand, heart, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about that, the Council of Europe competences for democratic culture, but I felt this is really simple, clear, practical. I can see us, you know, picking some of those actions that you have in there as really giving voice to how that operates in context. And then I just wanted to finish with my golden nuggets that I thought are just so beautiful. You know, you've got Action 7, which is about understanding the complex relationship between diversity and commonality. 11, about reasoning with evidence. I mean, those are just such clear calls to action of what we need to do. And then finally, my very loved favorite one about that believe in your own ability to make a difference. And Veronica, you really spoke to this, you know, that we have to have that belief. We have to have that shared belief that then propels us to go forward. Now, what I wanted to leave you with is a bit of a widow, a challenge of what, for me, it could shed more light on. And I think it's this idea of courage, the courage that you need to be a global citizen. And that courage comes from sheer responsibility, because sometimes to be a global citizen, you have to go against the grain. You have to do the unpopular thing. You have to stand up for what is right, even though that might actually be quite difficult. And I think your compass hints to that, but responsibility needs to be really at the oomph of what we do. And then finally, which is a sort of connection to the way that I started the conversation, is, you know, you talked about the breadth of AFS, Daniel, your proud history, the 100 countries that you work in. And so for me, it's about how do we resurface and celebrate local and traditional and indigenous ways of understanding global citizenship. Because while we are, you know, launching a framework and talking about all the new, actually, this is a very old concept. It's, if you read Greek or Roman philosophy, is there. And indigenous people have been the guardians of the planet in this way for centuries. So how do we recenter those stories? And I love what you did, Veronica, telling about that scholar story. How do we do it so that those voices are really what you are showing, what you're celebrating? That's it for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity. What a wonderful achievement.
Thank you so much, Carla, for your comments and for your reflections. And I think this notion of that there are different ways of understanding global citizenship, I think is really important. Even internally at AFS, when we developed this framework, a key part in our internal launch essentially was to ask our national organization to start translating it into their language. And in that process of translation, you learn it may not be a literal translation. It may not quite fit your own concepts of your own culture. And so by really thinking about what is the meaning behind this framework and how do I put words and language to this that matter in my context is really important. And so soon we'll also be able to share a lot of our translations with those of you who might be interested in that. But also your notion of courage, I think, is really important, and all of us have to have that courage to commit. So with that, I'd like to invite Priya from UNESCO to share with us her reflections on this. And it's wonderful to have you back again. Priya was also part of our AFS Youth Assembly last year, speaking about the Global Education Monitoring Report. So Priya, over to you.
And hello. It's morning. I'm also in New York. Just to give you a little bit of a history, I'm from Nepal. I'm originally from Nepal. Moved to the U.S. when I was, 18. So, and have had a life in Paris as well. Really, thank you so much for this opportunity to reflect on the AFS framework. I'll be sharing some thoughts on institutional and I guess, to some degree, a personal perspective. Let me congratulate you on this framing. I think it is succinct and comprehensive. And I speak, I think, institutionally from the perspective of having been with the Global Education Monitoring Report, but also having thought about education's role in sustainable development since the beginning of the SDGs. So, it's been almost a decade-long exercise for me. Many of you may know this, but the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO says, since war began in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Our team was started in 2002. It is editorially independent. It has the mandate to monitor progress on SDG 4, equitable quality education, lifelong learning for all. When we report, we often report on indicators. Measurement is crucial. We found that 250 million children and youth are out of school in 2023, for example, because it gives people awareness of the enormity of challenges. But besides what we do quantitatively, we're often doing, qualitative analysis. We're looking at strategies and policies, and we're trying to contribute to different kinds of big issues in education, education for sustainable development, accountability, inclusion, the role of non-state actors, how to use technology. I think putting together, these 2 decades of work, we are very, very committed to this idea that education is important for individual learning and well-being, but also for for making progress broadly. I think if you look at the 2016 Global Report on Education for People and Planet, you'll find that it says that education and lifelong learning, if formulated in the right way, can lead to a more sustainable future for all. Many of you are probably familiar. SDG target 4.7 is on education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. Very, very hard to measure, but very central to what we need in society. The most recent thing I've been working on is on climate change. I've been deeply engaged in the interlinkages between education and climate, and there'll be a paper that comes out in a few weeks on the topic. We have collaborations and policy understandings of governments, on this topic. What I found is that in the climate education community at UNESCO and in broader networks, there has been much progress in acknowledging the need not just to have a certain scientific knowledge, but also to learn how to take action, right, for the betterment of community. Everyone is talking about climate change, from students to corporations to governments, multilaterals. And many of us know, youth are leading on climate change and climate action. They call out how formal education is lacking. They demand changes in formal education. They are learning informally in different networks. They're focusing on issues of climate justice. So I feel like there's a lot of anxiety, but there's also hope in the collective, right? So I feel, given this perspective, this background, this framework deeply resonates and aligns with our work at UNESCO and at the GEM report. Education is indeed not just about imparting knowledge. I want to highlight a few points from the perspective of what I think an active global citizen needs to be especially reflective of after having looked at your framework. There are 2 points I want to make on equity. We all care very deeply, right, about this aim for a just, equitable, peaceful, and sustainable world. At our report, we have spent decades now documenting progress and challenges. What we have found time and time again is, despite all the money in the world, most countries are not financing education in equity-oriented ways. Despite all of the conversation, most donor governments are not fulfilling their commitments. Despite all of the corporate social responsibility, most companies are not focused on the global good. The world is more unequal than it has ever been. So there are systemic issues at play here that goes beyond a certain individual's responsibility. So however, though, as active global citizens, I think the sphere of influence discussion here can be tremendous, right? You can recognize and use your positions of power and privilege in all kinds of circles you're in, right? And I feel equity has to be at the core of your prioritization, one's prioritization of any situation, because without equity, you cannot really have a more peaceful or sustainable world. And I think similarly, on a sort of related point is when you think about the actions you could be taking in your life, that you can be a tech innovator, you can sort of connect with many networks, you can make lots of money, you probably can impact lots and lots of people. But I think it's very important to think about how vulnerability is multidimensional. Poor countries, poor neighborhoods are climate vulnerable. They are less educated, they are less healthy. Climate and poverty should not be viewed as siloed pieces of work, which it often is, in the worlds that I occupy. But so, just to give an example, if you're working on issues of energy, right, in your life as a younger person, just don't just think about the renewable energy and its benefits for society, but also think about the women who are sitting in front of cooking stoves and dealing with all these health risks. These are things that have been identified for decades now. We have all the evidence in the world, but it's just not happening. So whatever sector of work people are involved in, I think a critical and holistic evaluation of the effects of what you're doing will serve you well in this objective of trying to make a difference. 2 points on collaboration, and I think the framework does a good job of going there. But I would say that co-creation cannot just be empty words. So leaving one's comfort zone, aiming for action can, of course, begin in your local environment, something you really know. When you are working with people who have fewer resources compared to you or who are part of a community, like, why should you be the one solving issues here? And so you have to check many of your preconceived notions, you, me, right? Respect and dignity have to be foundational to how you engage as you move through the world. And I think that meaningful respect and meaningful and respectful engagement then becomes deeply inspirational, and I think a source of hope and optimism about the future. I really appreciated actually also the principle stating, discussions of lifelong transformations, working across ages. Because, as I've been listening and speaking with different kinds of youth and people talking about young people, there's often this pattern of giving lip service to young people and not giving them very little power, or sort of on the other extreme, trying to put all the responsibility for the future and still not giving them much power. So I think there has to be an intergenerational approach if we are to solve these complex challenges. Active global citizens, I think, as we live as active global citizens, we have to demand meaningful gender equitable partnerships across ages and across institutions. I think finally, because I work at a monitoring report, I want to end on measurement to say that if we say that what is documented gets highlighted, then I think it is vital that we do well on this dimension, right? The work that is done on active global citizenship, what impacts is it having? Are we open to multidisciplinary approaches to evaluating and focusing on this action dimension? We have to be cognizant of who is involved, how they were involved, what were the systemic impacts of whatever we're trying to do. We need to triangulate perspectives, ensure research is done ethically, collaboratively, meaningfully, if we are to signal that active global citizenship has to be our priority for this world we're imagining. So I feel like I kept saying you, but I feel like me, I feel like all of us have to think about this. But that's my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, for, I think, your important comment, but also for the important work of actually monitoring educational progress around the world. I think it is so important. I think your appeal for measurement and research for this educational framework is also very, very important, and is something that the Education Committee at AFS is currently investigating exactly what types of research we need to conduct to actually see if this framework works. And I think your comments about being very careful about who is involved, how the research is done, how we take different perspectives into account is very important. But I also think you highlight kind of the fact that there's so many challenges related to just the general provision of education, and especially related to equity issues. And so how do we kind of embed this framework in a larger context of the challenges that exist related to education, I think is especially important. I'd now like to turn to Sarah Jones from the University of Hull, giving a different perspective from the kind of university side of things. And we're really grateful for the wonderful partnership that we've had with Sarah and her institution over the past several years. So Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danielle. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm a reader in global education from the University of Hull, which is in the northeast of England. Normally when I tell people I'm a reader and it's in global education, I've lost them automatically. Reader's a very archaic term we use in some universities in this country. It's probably akin to an associate professor. And global education, I'm sure I probably don't have to explain that to this audience, but it includes a whole variety of things, which we could say it's global citizenship, global competence, education for sustainable development, regenerative education. I always often think of it as an umbrella term. And my area of specialism is teacher education and higher education. Just one other thing to note is that I'd say, although I'm an academic in a university, I'm definitely a practitioner researcher. I use participatory methods in my work, and I'm very much focused on the participant voice being central to any research that I do. And any research that I do is also centered very much on practice. And as Daniel said, I've been working with AFS for a few years now in some work around global competence in teacher education. The other thing I just wanted to say before I get going on the framework itself is how important the non-formal sector is in supporting and often leading initiatives in the sphere of global citizenship education. As I said, I'm from the formal sector at university, and I'd love to see much closer links with non-formal education organisations. And I don't mean AFS here, I'm speaking generally. The non-formal sector is often underrated or ignored by more formal education establishments, but has so much to offer. In fact, in the area of global citizenship, they have a vital role to play. And in my view, they have the ability to make a real impact with this work in schools, but also very much in universities where very little connection is happening with the non-formal sector, particularly in embedding global citizenship into programs. And I know this partly because I recently led a review, which is now being published as a book chapter, which Carla here was one of the co-authors with me. And we interviewed 12 non-formal organisations, and we found that the non-formal sector is making a significant and often overlooked contribution, often at multiple scales, from the grassroots, looking at, things like, exchanges, camps for school children, to the global, and looking at and thinking about advocacy in international policy. So yeah, I just wanted to applaud the work you do, which is vitally important and highly valuable. So looking at the framework and definition, firstly, I was very excited to see it at last. I know it's taken some work to get to this point. And I think when I looked at the actual document, I think you could say that the definition and the framework covered about 3 pages. And that might not seem a lot for what I'm sure has been months and months of really hard work. And having just completed a similar task at the University of Hull, where I led the development of a definition and framework for global competence, which sits across the whole university for staff and students, I can say with 100% certainty, I just know how challenging this task would have been for you at AFS. So for our university-wide definition, toolkit and framework, we decided to use the term competence, but that's rather than citizenship, but that really is because it fits with the competence-based education framework rather than we subscribe to the OECD notion as opposed to some other definition. And in fact, our definition which we created alone, it took just the definition alone took 6 months to develop, following a design-based process, which included stakeholders from across all sectors of the university and the wider community. So, reading this AFS definition and framework yesterday, I can really see the months it has probably taken you to come up with it, but also I can see how this was worth the effort. And when I say that, I mean that the definition that I see here, it brings a certain clarity of thought and what I would call an unwavering optimism for our planet. And importantly, I think it demonstrates the faith in our fellow humans. And personally, this gives me hope. And speaking more broadly now, and thinking about the challenges that many of us face, that's probably in how we engage with such frameworks. And I know a few of us have touched on that as we've been speaking, and how we can move people or support to people to move away from what I would probably call tinkering around the edges, or if we say this in another way, actually using a fundamental tenet of regenerative education, moving away from redesigning what people do to redefining who we are. That's not easy. You know, Nelson Mandela, he's one of my inspirers. He once said that the most difficult thing is not to change society, but to change yourself. And as I say, this isn't easy, but I think the definition and framework you've got here provides a really important roadmap, or as you call it, a compass, to guide people on this journey. The other thing I wanted to mention, and it has been mentioned by others, is this notion of action. And I'm absolutely thrilled to see the word active in the phrase global citizen, as it gets right to the heart of the matter. You could say, how can you have global citizenship without action? For me, it's about directly taking personal responsibility, and we could also talk about shared responsibility, but at the smallest level, it's about taking that personal responsibility. And the notion of personal responsibility is also central to the work that I do in global education, and particularly in the field of regenerative education, which is an emerging field. I don't know, maybe there's some of you who've not come across it, but the term, in terms of agriculture, people talk about regeneration in agriculture, or currently regenerative leadership, which is getting a lot of focus. Regenerative education is a newer area, and it's about moving not beyond education for sustainable development, but perhaps seeing it through a different through education through a different lens, and it's based on life-affirming principles. So, in other words, it's ever-changing, it's responsive, it's diverse, it's relational and interconnected. And at the heart of regenerative education principles is this idea of action. Whether it's cultivating personal transformation or nurturing systemic awareness. And as I said earlier, it's having a starting point that's around redefining who we are. And I guess in common with the AFS definition and framework, as Veronica just mentioned when she was introducing it, it's expanding our ways of being. So yeah, also in common with global citizenship, it's about the whole being. It's about developing a compass. I really love this idea of developing a compass for decision making. I love the term, and I might have to steal it. I'm just kidding. Yeah, but coming back to this notion of action, I'm so pleased it's been made explicit, turning the phrase global citizenship into active global citizenship. It's a super wonderful idea, and yeah, has real resonance for me. So lastly, the other thing that I wanted to mention was, well, really to applaud AFS for making both the definition and the framework open and accessible to others, so they can use it and build on the successful work. But just to add, if anyone listening to this is thinking of doing just that and using the framework, and kind of, I think, Piria, you touched on this, and Daniel, you picked it up, is that using other people's definitions and frameworks isn't as simple as it sounds. You know, definitions and frameworks often need contextualizing locally. And that's not just in the sense that there are cultural differences across localities and regions, but actually across organizations within localities as well. I'm just completing a piece of research at the moment which highlights this. We've had a series of experts from around the world sharing their views on how they engage with this work in education. And they all emphasize how they start with contextualizing terminology and definitions for the people and the place that they're in. So I would definitely start in that point if that's what you're going to do, if you're going to take this framework away with you. But utilising the AFS framework and definition would be a great way to start off such contextual conversations, and in making both the definition and the educational framework open and accessible to others. I think AFS is demonstrating that it's walking the talk, so to speak. Yeah, so that's all from me, and I look forward to seeing where you go next, and hope to support you as you shape and build that new direction, and keep working with you. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you also for sharing a little bit about your own experience developing a framework and the complexities that lie in that. And I will actually call on Veronica in a moment to talk a little bit about kind of like what sits behind this framework, because that was one of the questions that came in the Q&A section. But also, I think your comment around the importance of having active in there. And I know that there was a lot of debate that in some contexts, some people see that global citizenship already includes an active component, but we felt exactly like you said, this active word was really important to get to the heart of the matter, and the sense of personal responsibility is so important. But also you talk about the compass for decision making, which is part of the definition that we are using for active global citizenship. You're welcome to steal it. and that is the intent of this framework, that you should feel free to use some of the language. Give credit to AFS when you can. But we do want people to actively, I think, use the language and concepts described here. So thank you to the three of you for your comments and reflection. We have about 9 minutes left in this session. And I just want to, invite both Eloise and Veronica to perhaps add some additional comments. But I have one specific question for you, Veronica, that came in the chat. Someone asked about how AFS actually came up with this framework. And as several of you have already mentioned, months and months of work have gone into this, but is it grounded in theory? What theory did we look at? Is there empirical research? Of course, we have a lot of research about AFS's programs that helped inform this, but I know the committee looked at a lot of different theories, and so I just wanted to see if Veronica wanted to make a few reflections on kind of how this framework was actually developed.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the comments. I took extensive notes, really so much that we have to learn from you, Claire, and Sarah. So how is this? What's behind this framework? I think there's on the one hand there is a tradition, a story, a history of active global citizenship being named, perhaps not exactly articulated, but named as an impetus for the work that AFS has been doing. So there are multiple years of empirical, testing and trying out some of these ideas in practice. So about what is it, 3 years ago or so, the board created a group, an education committee. And that is when we decided within this education committee to begin to think about an articulation of active global citizenship that would really sort of speak to practitioners, speak to people on the ground, speak to people in different countries, different places, which as you all know is an incredible task. So I think how do you make a framework like this sort of work? So on the one hand, we drew on a very careful analysis of the existing framework. So Carla, when you were mentioning the echoes of the Council of Europe, the OECD, UNESCO, there's a lot of work that had to do with trying to bring together some of what we thought was quite strong, but a variety of frameworks within the north, but also sort of southern, frameworks from Argentina, from Brazil. We stopped in the committee and we asked ourselves, where does it work? The committee was composed by researchers and members of AFS, and sort of just practice and research already sort of in this co-construction. We asked ourselves 2 questions: what is the world in which we're living? What is the story of humans that we're sort of living in? And what kinds of persons do we think we need, for this world in which we're living? So these were gigantic, fundamental questions that would allow us to, in a way, gathering input from the community, which is like, all around the world, gathering like a sense of the pulse of the pulse of our times, right? To try to see how a framework can respond to our times, and clearly climate change came up, sustainability came up, global health, all of these things came up. We drew quite extensively also on prior research on learning science, and developmental research on sort of how kids develop the capacity for critical thinking, the capacity for perspective taking, sort of the relationship between perspective taking and compassion and empathy and so forth. So there's a lot of that that's embedded in the articulation of some of these points. There's a lot of committee negotiation too, right? So in the crafting of the text, as you know, there's a lot of sharpening the language, and I guess that. And then there were several rounds of sharing drafts with different locations, leaders in different locations, these conversations and dialogues that were documented that then fed back into sort of the articulation of the language of the framework. So this is a very design-based, cyclical process of, back and forth between theory and practice and perspectives and so forth. And I think that one of the things that to me is extremely important, speaking to what you were saying a little bit earlier, is that we conceive of this framework as a platform for dialogue, right? So there's a language that allows us to dialogue about some of our aspirations for our youth, some of our aspirations for ourselves. And we must understand that this framework will mean different things in different contexts, institutionally and culturally, and so forth, and allow for that to be the case, and really invite that happening. So, and I like to call it, this like working in the space of optimal ambiguity. So a framework needs to be clear enough so that it conveys a collection of ideas, but at the same time, sort of allow for the ambiguity that invites interpretations, and really understand the richness of this diversity of interpretation. So in that sense, I think we're really we're sort of seeking that level of optimal ambiguity and that level of dialogue between research, practice, and change makers on the ground. There's a collection of youth who helped us articulate some of the language as well. And today, in a variety of places within all of the centers of the directorates in different countries at AFS are really sort of in a process of reinterpreting, not only translating as Daniel was so accurately saying, but really reinterpreting, recreating some of this.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And as you can see, a lot, I think, went into this process of developing it. And I think there could probably be a whole group discussion around how to develop such frameworks and how to avoid difficult missteps. But I think I'm really grateful to all those people who contributed to this. And maybe in 1 minute, Eloise, can I ask you, because we had one other question that I thought was really interesting, and just your perspective on this. One person asked, what critical factors do we think might significantly hinder one's chance of becoming and remaining an active global citizen? Right? And it's, I think, a really interesting question. What holds us back, or what do we need in order to actually kind of keep that strength of being an active global citizen? What's your reflection on that?
Oh, that's a big question to answer in 1 minute. 2 parts. One, of course, and this is probably more of a serious answer, of course, is that there's many people around the world for whom it is very hard maybe to speak out. And so there will be conversations around this, but I think as well, when using this framework, what spheres can we influence? What ways can we, come together to do what we can within the framework, within our local context. So there's a bigger conversation there. Right now, I think one reflection I would just say is this framework is the basis. I'm really proud of the amazing work that we have done, but it is, a piece of paper that we really needed to start off with, that then will grow. It is active. As Sarah said, she's a practitioner first and foremost, and there are a few things to come from this. And so to sort of answer your question in terms of, what's stopping people from being, an active global citizen, well, perhaps what I might say is, the next the next task is maybe on you, on how you can use this framework and maybe what you can influence, how you can translate it, not just in language, but in culture, in tradition, in how it works for where you are at the local level too. And then also to come as well, what I'm really excited about is from this framework, from this definition will grow some clear research avenues as well. So that was a very roundabout response there, but there's a few things going into that, and I really welcome more and more conversation offline on that.
Thank you so much, Eloise. So we're at the end now, and I just want to reflect on a couple things that came up. So one is the sense of that there are many different ways of understanding global citizenship, that we all, though, understand it as a lifelong journey and as a process of transformation. I love this concept that came up of this courage that we have to have, and that comes with individual responsibility, and the sense of believing in your own ability to make a difference. And I very much love, Sarah, how you said that there's an unwavering optimism that underlies this framework. And I think that is hugely important because the world does look challenging. It can be deeply depressing to think about all that faces us. We have to be optimistic if we want to tackle any of this. So I very much like that this has to be core of our activities and thinking in terms of different questions in the chat around specific ways of how you can get involved. This is only the beginning. This framework is now core of AFS's approach and strategy. So in the coming months and years, there will be many new actions, new programs, new tools for different groups, right? Whether you're a young person, a family, working adults, an educator, whatever it might be, but there will be a lot of work that goes into developing tools for you to actually become active, but also to measure this. I want to thank everyone for their contributions to this framework. I want to thank the speakers and experts here today. And I want to give a huge shout out also to Carol for her work leading this effort internally at AFS. And thank you all for joining from around the world and staying with us. We will share all this information. You can find more here, but also to all the attendees, you will receive more by email. So with that, and with an unwavering optimism in our future and our responsibility towards our future, I release you to enjoy the rest of your day or your evening. Thank you all very much for joining. Bye-bye.